Mom, you don't really need 3 properties at your age, my daughter-in-law whispered behind me while I was still carrying appetizer trays at my own retirement party. My son laughed softly beside her. I kept smiling and walked toward the champagne table like I hadn't heard a single word. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end and tell me where you're watching from, because even now, I still find comfort knowing someone out there understands what it feels like to become invisible inside your own family. The ballroom at Harbor Pines Country Club glowed with soft golden lights and polished crystal chandeliers. A jazz trio played near the stage while waiters in black vests moved carefully between round tables covered in ivory linen. My retirement party was larger than I expected. More than 100 people had come. Former clients, old employees, friends from the Chamber of Commerce. People who still remembered when Thomas and I started Harper Industrial Supply from a rented garage with 1 delivery truck and $7,000 in savings. 42 years later, the company had grown into something respectable. 3 warehouses, 70 employees, contracts across 3 states. Everyone kept congratulating me as if the evening belonged to me, but somehow it didn't feel that way. Not really. Mrs. Harper, you should be sitting down tonight. One of the caterers told me gently as I adjusted a tray of crab cakes in my hands. I smiled politely. Old habits, I said. The truth was nobody had asked me to help. I just noticed the staff falling behind, and instinct took over. For most of my life, when something needed fixing, I fixed it. When someone needed help, I stepped in. That was who I had always been. As I moved between the tables, I noticed a large display board near the stage that hadn't been there earlier. Gold letters stretched across the top. The Harper Legacy Transition. Beneath it were framed photographs of Jason and Melissa standing in front of company buildings I had spent decades paying off. There was even a printed organizational chart listing future leadership roles. Jason as CEO, Melissa overseeing financial assets, Courtney handling brand development. My name appeared at the bottom in smaller letters. Evelyn Harper, retired founder. Honorary presence only. I stopped walking for a moment. Just long enough for the tray in my hands to feel heavier than it should have. Looks more professional this way, Courtney said suddenly beside me, smoothing the sleeve of her cream-colored blazer. People feel more confident when they see the next generation already in control. Her smile was flawless. Practiced. I looked toward Jason, expecting at least some discomfort in his face. Instead, he avoided my eyes completely and reached for another glass of bourbon from a passing waiter. Across the room, I heard Melissa laughing with a group of investors while pointing at a stack of folders spread across one of the tables. Asset summaries, property evaluations, distribution plans, my distribution plans. And there I was, still carrying silver trays through my own retirement party while my children quietly divided the life I hadn't even finished living yet. The strange thing about becoming old is not the wrinkles or the silver hair. It is the moment people begin speaking around you instead of to you. I continued moving through the ballroom with the empty tray balanced carefully against my hip while conversations floated around me like I was part of the furniture. Near the windows overlooking the golf course, 2 regional managers from the company were praising Jason for stepping up into leadership. Jason nodded modestly, accepting compliments for a business he had never stayed awake worrying about at 3 in the morning. He had never signed payroll checks while praying there would still be enough money left to cover the electric bill. He had never loaded industrial equipment into trucks during January snowstorms because 2 employees had quit unexpectedly. But tonight, he stood there in a tailored Navy suit accepting handshakes like a prince inheriting a kingdom. I passed by table 7 and overheard Melissa speaking quietly to Courtney. The Arizona property should probably be sold first, she said while flipping through one of the folders. Mom barely uses it anymore. Courtney took a sip of white wine and shrugged. Honestly, she does not need 3 houses. At this stage, simpler is better. At this stage. I almost smiled hearing that phrase, as though I had become some aging machine with a limited shelf life. The Arizona property they discussed so casually was the first real vacation home Thomas and I ever bought together. I still remembered the day we signed the papers. Thomas had kissed my forehead in the parking lot outside the bank because we finally felt successful enough to breathe for the first time in decades. We had spent every Thanksgiving there after that. Jason learned how to grill steaks on that patio. Melissa learned how to swim in the pool out back. But now they spoke about the house the same way people discuss replacing outdated office furniture. Disposable, temporary, replaceable. Mrs. Harper, a familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned and saw Richard Bennett standing beside me. Richard had been one of our earliest clients. His company stayed with us for almost 30 years. He smiled warmly. I was hoping to catch you before you disappeared into retirement. I do not think retirement works that way, I answered softly. He laughed, then lowered his voice slightly. You know, everybody still talks about how you built this company from nothing. Not many people could have done what you did. Before I could answer, Courtney suddenly appeared beside us with perfect timing. Richard, thank you so much for coming, she said smoothly while touching his arm lightly. We are all very excited for the future. The future, another phrase I had heard all evening. Strange how every future they described seemed to have so little room for me inside it. Richard looked back at me politely. Well, you deserve some rest now, Evelyn. I nodded because that was easier than explaining the exhaustion I actually felt. It was not physical exhaustion. It was something colder. The exhaustion of realizing your children have already started speaking about your life in the past tense while you are still standing in front of them. As the jazz trio shifted into a slower song, I noticed Olivia near the back of the ballroom, watching the conversations unfold with uneasy eyes. Unlike the others, she was not smiling. She glanced at the folders on the table, then at me carrying another tray toward the kitchen doors. For a second, our eyes met. Hers looked confused. Mine probably looked tired. Then I heard Courtney laugh again behind me. The transition will be much easier once everything is officially under our control. And suddenly the ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a quiet corporate takeover disguised beneath champagne glasses and retirement speeches. The speeches started shortly after 8 o'clock. One by one, people walked onto the stage holding champagne glasses and carefully prepared note cards. Most of them were kind. Too kind, perhaps. They spoke about my work ethic, my leadership, my generosity. One former employee even joked that I used to arrive at the warehouse before sunrise and leave after everybody else had gone home. The room laughed softly. I smiled when expected. I thanked people when necessary. But somewhere deep inside me, something had already started pulling away from the evening entirely. I sat near the back now beside a large arrangement of white roses while Jason stood near the stage reviewing his speech with Courtney. Every few seconds she adjusted his tie or whispered corrections into his ear like a campaign manager preparing a politician before an election. Across the ballroom, Melissa was showing guests architectural renderings on her tablet. I overheard phrases drifting through the air. Luxury renovation. Expanded market value. Potential buyers. It took me a moment to realize they were discussing the lake house in Michigan. My lake house. The one Thomas and I bought after our 25th anniversary. The one where we buried our old golden retriever beneath the maple tree near the dock. I stared down at the folded napkin in my lap and remembered how Thomas used to wake before dawn there just to fish alone on the quiet water. Some memories should never become business conversations. Grandma. Olivia's voice interrupted gently beside me. I looked up and saw her standing there holding 2 untouched glasses of sparkling water. You look like you needed this. I accepted one with a small smile. Thank you, sweetheart. She sat carefully beside me and glanced toward the front of the ballroom where Jason was now shaking hands with investors. Everybody keeps talking about transition plans, she said quietly. Did you know they were doing all this tonight? Her voice carried something the others no longer seemed capable of carrying. Concern. I took a slow sip before answering. Apparently, there are many things happening lately that I am expected to quietly accept. Olivia frowned slightly. Mom said the company already has new ownership structures prepared. Ownership structures. Such cold words for something Thomas and I built with our entire lives. Before I could answer, the microphone screeched softly and the room turned toward the stage. Jason stepped forward with the easy confidence of a man who believed the future already belonged to him. Tonight is about honoring a remarkable woman, he began. The audience applauded warmly. He smiled graciously and continued. My mother spent decades building a strong foundation for this family and this company. And now it is finally time for her to relax and let the next generation carry things forward. Relax. Such an innocent-sounding word. But sometimes people use gentle language when they are trying to remove you from your own life. Jason continued speaking while a slideshow appeared behind him. Pictures of company expansions, award ceremonies, family vacations. But I noticed something strange almost immediately. Thomas appeared often in the photographs. Jason and Melissa appeared constantly. Courtney somehow appeared in photos taken years before she had even joined the family. But me? I was barely there at all. A cropped shoulder in one image. Half my face in another. In one photograph from our first warehouse opening, they had cut me out entirely except for my hand resting near the ribbon scissors. Olivia noticed it too. I could tell by the way her posture stiffened beside me. "That is not right," she whispered under her breath. I did not respond. I simply watched the giant screen glowing above the ballroom, while my own life played out like a story being slowly rewritten by people who had already decided I no longer belonged at the center of it. After the applause faded, dinner service finally began. The ballroom slowly filled with the soft clinking of silverware and polite conversation, but the warmth in the room felt artificial now, like heat coming from decorative candles instead of a real fire. I remained seated beside Olivia while servers carried plates of filet mignon and roasted vegetables from table to table. Across the room, Jason had already surrounded himself with board members and investors. Courtney sat beside him with one hand resting lightly on his arm, smiling every time somebody mentioned the company's future. I noticed she never once used the words "your mother" when speaking about me. Only Evelyn, or founder, or transition. People become easier to remove when you stop calling them family. "Grandma," Olivia said quietly as she unfolded her napkin. "Did Mom and Uncle Jason really make those plans without asking you first?" I looked down at the untouched food in front of me. "People often mistake silence for permission," I answered softly. Olivia stared at me for a second, then lowered her voice even more. "I found one of the folders near the bar earlier. They already divided the vacation properties." Her words settled heavily between us. I did not react immediately. I simply reached for my water glass while years of small memories slowly rearranged themselves inside my mind like pieces of a puzzle finally locking together. Courtney insisting I no longer needed access to certain financial reports because retirement was approaching. Jason encouraging me to spend less stressful time at the office. Melissa suggesting I move into a smaller home because maintenance becomes harder at your age. At the time, each comment sounded harmless by itself. Caring, even. But now I could finally see the pattern beneath all of it. They had not been preparing me for rest. They had been preparing me for removal. Across the ballroom, I noticed Richard Bennett speaking with two executives near the display board. One of them pointed toward Jason while nodding approvingly. "Smooth transition," I heard him say. "That is rare in family businesses." Smooth transition. I almost laughed hearing that phrase. Nothing about this felt smooth to me. It felt rehearsed. Like everybody had received the script except the woman who spent 4 decades building the stage. Suddenly Courtney stood from her chair and tapped her wine glass gently with a spoon. The room quieted almost immediately. "Before dessert," she announced gracefully, "we thought it would be meaningful to share some exciting updates about the next chapter for Harper Industrial Supply." My stomach tightened slightly. Beside me, Olivia sat straighter in her chair. Large presentation boards were rolled toward the stage, while several assistants began distributing glossy packets to the tables. I watched guests flip through pages containing company projections, leadership charts, property restructuring plans, and investment strategies. At the bottom of one page, I caught sight of something that made my chest grow cold. Residential Asset Consolidation Proposal. Underneath it was a list of my properties. The Michigan Lake House, the Arizona home, even Thomas's ranch outside Bozeman. Next to each property were projected sale values and estimated transfer timelines. My fingers tightened around the edge of the tablecloth. Thomas's ranch. The place where his ashes were scattered beneath the cedar trees exactly as he requested. "Mom always taught us that growth means knowing when to let go," Jason said proudly from the stage. Several people nodded approvingly. Courtney smiled beside him like a woman unveiling a successful merger. I looked around the ballroom slowly. Nobody seemed uncomfortable except Olivia. Nobody seemed shocked except me. Then Olivia leaned closer and whispered the words that finally cracked something open inside my chest. "Grandma, I do not think they expected you to still fight back." I turned toward her carefully. For the first time all evening, I felt something sharper than sadness settling quietly beneath my calm. Not anger. Something colder. Awareness. The presentation ended with another round of applause that sounded far too enthusiastic for what had just happened. People returned to their dinners, flipping casually through pages that mapped out the future sale of pieces of my life as if they were discussing quarterly inventory numbers. I remained perfectly still in my chair while the ballroom lights reflected softly against crystal glasses and polished silverware. Somewhere near the front, somebody laughed too loudly. Courtney's laugh followed seconds later. Light, relaxed, victorious. Olivia reached for the glossy packet left at our table and slowly turned another page. I watched her expression tighten. "Grandma," she whispered carefully. "They already assigned ownership percentages for the company shares." I extended my hand silently, and she passed the packet to me beneath the table like we were exchanging something dangerous. Page after page revealed more than I expected. Jason receiving executive voting authority. Melissa taking control of property liquidation oversight. Courtney listed as director of brand expansion despite never having spent a single exhausting afternoon inside one of our warehouses. Then I noticed something even colder near the bottom corner of one document. Founder Advisory, Transition Schedule. My name appeared beside a proposed timeline reducing my involvement over the next 6 months until all operational access would be fully transferred. No discussion, no signature from me, just assumptions written neatly into corporate language. I stared at the paper while memories surfaced quietly one after another. Courtney encouraging me to take more time for myself. Jason changing passwords on internal systems because the younger staff works faster digitally. Melissa insisting I should stop attending certain financial meetings because stress is harder on seniors. Each moment had seemed small at the time. Loving, even. But now I understood something painful. None of them thought they were betraying me. In their minds, they were simply reorganizing assets before the old owner became inconvenient. "This is unbelievable," Olivia muttered softly beside me. "Did Mom really think you would never see this?" I folded the packet carefully and placed it back onto the table. "Your mother learned a long time ago that people rarely question what is presented." Confidently, I answered. Across the ballroom, Jason stepped away from a group of investors and approached our table with practiced warmth. "There you are," he said, smiling down at me. "Everybody keeps asking where the guest of honor disappeared to." Guest of honor. Such polite wording for a woman being quietly removed from her own legacy. "The presentation was impressive," I said calmly. Jason relaxed slightly, clearly relieved by my tone. "We just wanted tonight to reassure everyone that the future is secure." Courtney appeared beside him moments later carrying a champagne flute. "And honestly," she added smoothly, "this transition will finally let you enjoy life without carrying all the pressure anymore." I looked at her for a long second. Her diamond earrings caught the ballroom lights every time she moved her head. Everything about Courtney always looked polished, controlled. Even her kindness sounded professionally rehearsed. "You all seem very prepared," I replied softly. Jason laughed lightly. "Well, planning ahead is important." Planning ahead. Another phrase people use when they have already made decisions without you. Olivia remained silent beside me, but I could feel tension radiating from her posture. She was beginning to see the same thing I had finally started seeing tonight. This was never truly about retirement. It was about ownership, control, positioning. The family I spent decades protecting had slowly transformed into a boardroom calculating how much space I still occupied. Then Courtney leaned slightly closer and lowered her voice enough that only our table could hear. "You should be proud, Evelyn," she said with a pleasant smile. "Very few people get to step away while everything is still thriving. Step away. Not choose. Not decide. Step away." As if my departure had already become inevitable, I smiled politely back at her and folded my hands in my lap. But somewhere beneath the calm expression on my face, something inside me had fully awakened now. Because for the first time all evening, I stopped feeling hurt and started paying attention. By the time dessert arrived, the ballroom had become louder, softer, stranger all at once. Conversations blurred together beneath the sound of clinking forks and low jazz music, while waiters carried slices of layered chocolate cake from table to table. I barely touched mine. Across the room, investors were already congratulating Jason as though the leadership transition had officially happened tonight, instead of merely being announced. Every smile directed toward him felt like another quiet erasure of everything Thomas and I built together. "I need some air," Olivia whispered beside me. I nodded gently. "Go ahead, sweetheart." She hesitated before standing. "You are handling this better than I would." I almost answered honestly then. I almost told her that calmness and shock can sometimes look exactly the same. Instead, I simply offered a small smile and watched her disappear toward the terrace doors overlooking the golf course. A few minutes later, I stood slowly from my chair and walked toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. Nobody stopped me. Nobody noticed. The farther I moved away from the ballroom, the quieter everything became. Thick carpet softened my footsteps while muted lighting cast long shadows across framed photographs hanging along the walls. Halfway down the corridor, I heard voices coming from one of the small private conference rooms near the back. Jason's voice. Courtney's too. The door was not fully closed. "We should finalize the Montana ranch first," Courtney said calmly. "That property alone could cover the expansion loan without touching the investment accounts." "Mom might hesitate about the ranch," Jason answered quietly. "Dad was sentimental about it." Courtney let out a short breath that sounded almost amused. "Jason, your mother is emotional, not irrational. Once everything is presented professionally, she will sign." Sign. Such a simple word. As though my entire life could be reduced to a few signatures placed neatly beneath papers I had never agreed to. I stood perfectly still outside the doorway, while Jason lowered his voice further. "The board already expects me to take over by the end of the quarter. We cannot delay this now." "Then do not give her room to reconsider," Courtney replied smoothly. "At her age, comfort matters more than control. Keep emphasizing retirement, family, less stress. She will eventually let go." Silence followed for several seconds. Then Jason laughed quietly. "Honestly, I think she already has." Something inside me became very still hearing that sentence. Not shattered, not wounded. Still. I turned away before they could notice me standing there and continued down the hallway toward the empty lounge near the lobby windows. Outside, rain had started falling softly across the dark golf course, turning the glass into a blurred mirror. I lowered myself carefully into one of the leather chairs and stared at my reflection for a long moment. 67 years old. Silver hair pinned neatly behind my ears. Pearl earrings Thomas bought for our 30th anniversary. Hands that had signed payroll checks for decades. Hands that once held both my children before they could even walk. Somewhere along the way, my family stopped seeing those hands as belonging to a person. They started seeing them as access, authority, ownership waiting to be transferred. A few minutes later, Olivia entered the lounge carrying her phone tightly in one hand. Her face looked pale now. "Grandma," she said softly, sitting beside me. "I think you need to see something." She opened a group message thread between Melissa, Jason, and Courtney. At the top was a photograph taken earlier that evening from inside the ballroom. Me carrying appetizer trays near the buffet table. Beneath the image, Courtney had written, "Keeping her busy made tonight much easier." Jason replied with a laughing emoji. Melissa added, "Just get through tonight, and the lawyers can handle the rest next week." Olivia slowly lowered the phone into her lap. The rain continued tapping gently against the windows while the ballroom music echoed faintly from down the hallway. For the first time all evening, I finally understood the full truth. This retirement party had never been for me at all. It was for them. A celebration of ownership transfer. A farewell dinner for a woman they had already decided was finished. Olivia and I stayed in the lounge for several quiet minutes after I finished reading the messages on her phone. Neither of us spoke immediately. There are moments in life when words only make humiliation feel more real. Outside the windows, the rain continued falling steadily across the dark golf course while distant laughter drifted faintly from the ballroom. My retirement party was still happening without me. I folded my hands together in my lap and stared at the reflection of the chandelier lights against the polished marble floor. "I am so sorry," Olivia whispered finally. Her voice trembled slightly now. "I did not know they were doing this." I looked at her gently. Neither did I. She lowered her eyes toward the phone again. "Mom and Uncle Jason talk about business constantly lately, but I thought it was normal planning." I did not realize. Her sentence faded unfinished. I understood why. Some truths are difficult to say out loud once they become undeniable. After a while, I stood slowly from the chair and smoothed the front of my navy dress. "Come on," I said softly. If we stay hidden too long, people will start wondering. Olivia looked surprised by my calmness. Truthfully, I surprised myself too. I thought I would feel devastated after seeing those messages. Instead, I felt clear. Clear in a way I had not felt in months. Perhaps because confusion had finally disappeared. I was no longer trying to interpret small behaviors or excuse quiet disrespect. The picture was complete now. When we returned to the ballroom, dessert plates were already being cleared away and the jazz trio had switched to softer music. Jason spotted me immediately and walked over carrying his usual polished smile. There you are, he said warmly. People have been asking about you. I needed a little quiet, I answered. Courtney joined us seconds later, her expression perfectly composed as always. You should not overdo it tonight, she said gently. This evening is supposed to be stress-free for you. Stress-free. Another carefully chosen phrase. I noticed now how often they spoke to me the way people speak to someone fragile. Someone nearing irrelevance. Actually, Jason added casually, Melissa and I thought it might be a good idea for all of us to have dinner next week and go over some future planning together. Future planning. I almost admired how professionally they disguised greed as concern. What kind of planning? I asked quietly. Jason exchanged a quick glance with Courtney before answering. Just practical things. The properties. The business structure. Making life easier for you moving forward. Easier for you. Never once had any of them asked what I actually wanted. Courtney smiled softly beside him. You deserve peace now, Evelyn. There it was again. Peace. Rest. Simplicity. Every comforting word wrapped carefully around the same hidden message. Step aside. Hand it over. Become smaller. Before I could answer, Richard Bennett approached our group, holding a glass of bourbon. Jason, he said with a grin, you are inheriting one hell of a company. Jason laughed modestly. I have big shoes to fill. Richard nodded toward me. Your mother built something rare. People like Evelyn do not come around often. Jason smiled politely, but I noticed something cold flicker briefly across Courtney's face. Not annoyance. Impatience. As though compliments directed toward me delayed the transition they were eager to complete. Then Richard said something none of them expected. Thomas always told me Evelyn was the real backbone behind everything. Silence settled over our small circle for half a second too long. Courtney recovered first with a smooth laugh. Well, thankfully the next generation is ready now. Ready now? I looked at her carefully. At Jason beside her. At the ballroom filled with people celebrating a future they assumed already belonged to my children. And for the first time all evening, I stopped feeling like the oldest person in the room. Because wisdom has nothing to do with age. Sometimes wisdom is simply recognizing the exact moment people mistake your kindness for surrender. The party finally began winding down close to 10 o'clock. Guests collected coats near the entrance while valets pulled luxury sedans beneath the covered driveway outside the country club. One by one, people hugged me goodbye and thanked me for everything I had built. Some looked sincere. Others looked relieved to have witnessed the official beginning of a new era. Jason remained near the front doors shaking hands like a newly elected executive, while Courtney stood beside him collecting compliments with polished grace. Melissa had already left early with several folders tucked beneath her arm. I noticed that detail immediately. She had protected the paperwork more carefully than she protected me all evening. Olivia stayed close beside me while I gathered my purse and gloves from the back of my chair. Do you want me to drive you home? She asked quietly. No, sweetheart. I will be fine. She hesitated. I do not think you should be alone tonight. Her concern warmed me more than the ballroom ever had. I touched her hand gently. Sometimes being alone is the only way to hear yourself think clearly. Before she could answer, Jason approached us with Courtney close behind him. Mom, he said warmly. Before you leave, there is something we wanted to give you. Courtney reached into a leather portfolio and removed a thick envelope with my name printed neatly across the front. I looked down at it without touching it yet. Just some preliminary transition documents, Jason explained casually. Nothing urgent. We thought you could review everything comfortably at home before our family dinner next week. Courtney smiled softly. We already organized most of it to make things easier for you. Easier. Always easier. I finally accepted the envelope and slid it slowly into my purse. How thoughtful, I answered calmly. Jason seemed relieved by my reaction. He kissed my cheek lightly before turning toward another departing guest. Courtney lingered beside me for half a second longer. Tonight went beautifully, she said quietly. I think Thomas would have been proud seeing the family united like this. For the first time all evening, I almost let my expression change. Not because of anger, because of how casually she used my husband's name while standing on top of the life he helped build. Thomas believed family meant loyalty, I replied softly. Courtney's smile flickered almost invisibly before returning again. Of course. Then she walked away. Outside, cold rain still fell steadily across the parking lot. While the valet brought my black Lincoln sedan to the curb, I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door quietly behind me. The silence inside the car felt almost sacred after hours of polished conversations and hidden agendas. For several minutes, I simply sat there watching raindrops move across the windshield beneath the country club lights. Then I opened the envelope. Property transfer proposals, executive restructuring agreements, asset consolidation authorizations, signature tabs already marked with yellow stickers waiting for my approval. Efficient, organized, prepared long before tonight ever began. I turned another page and suddenly froze. Attached near the back was a proposed residential relocation plan recommending that I move into a luxury senior living community within 6 months to simplify estate management. Estate management. I stared at those words while the rain tapped steadily against the roof of the car. They were not preparing me for retirement. They were preparing for my disappearance. Slowly, I reached into the center console and pulled out an old leather document holder Thomas gave me years ago. Inside were several business cards, insurance papers, and one small folded note written entirely in my husband's handwriting. If anything ever feels wrong, trust your instincts before you trust family pressure. Beneath the note sat another card I had not looked at in years. Benjamin Carlisle, family attorney. I held the card quietly between my fingers while memories surfaced of long conversations Thomas and Benjamin used to have behind closed office doors after board meetings. Back then I never asked many questions. Thomas always handled the legal protections himself. Just in case, he used to say. At the time, I assumed he meant lawsuits or competitors. Sitting there alone in the rain outside my own retirement party, I finally realized he may have meant something else entirely. Something much closer to home. The next morning, I woke before sunrise without needing an alarm. For 42 years my body had learned how to wake early for warehouse deliveries, inventory calls, payroll deadlines, and emergencies that never cared whether it was a holiday or a weekend. Retirement was supposed to change that, at least according to my children. I stood quietly in the kitchen of my lakefront home in Michigan while coffee brewed beside the window overlooking the water. The rain from the night before had passed, leaving the lake perfectly still beneath pale, gray morning light. Thomas used to love mornings like this. Quiet water tells the truth. He once told me while we sat on the dock years ago. You can see every reflection clearly. I finally understood what he meant. By 7:30, I was already dressed and driving toward downtown Grand Rapids with Benjamin Carlisle's business card resting on the passenger seat beside me. His office occupied the top floor of an old limestone building Thomas always trusted because, in his words, serious people still use real stone. When I stepped into the reception area, the young assistant behind the desk looked surprised. "Mrs. Harper," she said politely, standing immediately. "Mr. Carlisle will want to know you are here." A few moments later, Benjamin himself appeared from the hallway carrying reading glasses in one hand. He looked older than I remembered, thinner too. But the moment he saw me, his expression changed from professional courtesy to quiet concern. "Evelyn," he said carefully, "I wondered how long it would take before you came here." That sentence stopped me cold. He already knew, or at least suspected. Benjamin led me into his private office overlooking the river and closed the door behind us. Thick shelves lined the walls filled with leather-bound legal volumes, while framed photographs of courtroom ceremonies and retirement dinners hung neatly beside the windows. He motioned for me to sit. "Thomas left instructions years ago," he said calmly before I could even speak. "If you ever came to see me alone regarding family pressure, I was to show you everything immediately." My hands remained perfectly still in my lap, but inside my chest something shifted heavily. "Everything?" I asked quietly. Benjamin nodded once and unlocked a long cabinet behind his desk. From inside, he removed several thick binders along with a sealed envelope bearing Thomas's handwriting. My name was written across the front. He placed it carefully on the desk between us. Your husband anticipated this possibility long before he passed away, Benjamin explained. He loved your children deeply, but he also understood something about wealth and family businesses. Entitlement grows quietly. I stared at the envelope for several seconds before finally opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter from Thomas dated almost 8 years earlier. Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means somebody has mistaken your kindness for weakness. I felt my throat tighten slightly. Benjamin opened one of the binders beside us and slowly turned several pages toward me. Harper Industrial Supply was restructured after Thomas's diagnosis, he explained. Most controlling authority was transferred into a protected trust under your sole direction. I looked down at the documents carefully. Legal language, signatures, corporate protections. Jason does not control the company. I asked softly. Benjamin adjusted his glasses. Jason controls daily operations only because you permitted it. The ownership structure itself cannot be altered without your direct approval. Silence filled the office. Outside the tall windows, morning traffic moved steadily along the river while sunlight slowly broke through the clouds. For the first time since the retirement party began, I finally felt something stronger than humiliation. Stability. Thomas had seen this possibility coming long before I ever did. And quietly, without drama or warning, he had made sure the family we built together could never be stolen simply because our children became impatient waiting for ownership.